He was saying that the way they spun the documentary was that we have to make Carl look bad so that we can try and save face as the church, as Hillsong.
Tastemakers.
Class. We do more than make a living, we make a life. When everything is dark, we are the light. We are the tastemakers. Aight. Let tomorrow tell the stories that we make tonight. We do more than make a living.
Fallen pastor to a redeemed pastor. Who is in a fall himself 4 years ago, talking about Carl Lentz here. And he has come back, you guys. He is back in the, not spotlight, but he's back in the public. For those of y'all who don't know, Carl Lentz was a pastor from this big white conglomerate of a church called Hillsong. They started in Australia. No, they were like the mob. I'm telling y'all, Hillsong was no joke. So they started in Australia, and they kind of franchised all through America. And one of the most popular churches was in New York City, and Carl Lentz was the pastor at New York City. And when he came on the scene, it was this first time we had seen anything like this as far as the celebrity pastor. That's where that term kind of got indoctrinated once we discovered Carl Lentz. So long story short, Carl Lentz falls. He has a moral failure. He has several affairs. He's addicted to drugs, and he's just completely different as a person than how his congregation, how the public, and how everybody knew him to be. So this happened in 2020 is when this whole thing happened with him. So he gets caught up, and he realizes that his reign is over. He realizes this is going to come out. I need to, tell my family, my wife, my kids, everybody, before the media does. So he does that. He gets fired from Hillsong Church, and he goes dark 30. He goes black. He goes dark for 4 years. All right. Now he's back. Carl Lentz is back, and he's telling his story, and he's doing it in the style of a podcast. Now, I was all over this story when it came out. I was watching the documentaries about Hillsong. I was watching the rise and fall of, Carl Lentz as the person, and I think it's because I rolled in those circles as far as like white church circles. So, I'm like a hybrid. I got love for the black church. I rock with the black church, got a lot of black church friends, but like my life is in the contemporary white church, if I'm honest, because I work there. I'm in those circles, whatever. But I love black church. I miss it. Oh, I miss black church. So yeah, Carl's back now. He has a podcast. Episode 3 he's now on episode 3, and he's kind of telling his side of the story. He's telling, about what was real and what wasn't real. He admits to everything that was, as far as like, yes, I cheated on my wife multiple times. Yes, I was addicted to Adderall. Yes, I went to therapy. I went to rehab. My family was broken. We didn't know what we were going to do. And he kind of goes through the whole entire timeline and gives his side of the story. So when he does this, he also tells what's not true. He says, these documentaries were out and I could have said a lot of stuff about them, but I didn't. Because nobody wants to hear from me because I'm the fallen pastor. And he was saying that the way they spun the documentary was that we have to make Carl look bad so that we can try and save face as the church, as Hillsong. Because Hillsong also was going through a scandal, and the leader of their church was caught up in some essay. You know what I'm saying? I'll say that. You can read between the lines. In some essay cases. And he was, made out or found out that he was this monster. And they knew if Carl got to the media first, Carl knew a lot about the dirt that was going on. So Carl Lentz says one time in the podcast that they made him sign an NDA before he got fired. They say, listen, we're going to fire you, but you got to sign this NDA or you won't get the money that we're going to give you. So he was like, I had to sign it. I was getting fired. I didn't have any money. So that's one of the reasons why I was silent on the situation for so long, was because I couldn't talk. You know what I'm saying? So that's the Carl Lentz story from the rise and the fall. That's like a little small part of it. And the question that I want to pose and the conversation I want to have with you guys is, are pastors like this? Our pastors, can they come back from such a public fall? Can they come back from such a public, like a sex scandal or a moral failure or an affair? Like, should pastors be allowed back in the pulpit after something like that happens, or even something smaller, like a smaller sin, right? And they're living two double lives, and then they get caught, and then they come back and they go on the repentance tour, and now everything's good again, right? Like, how do we feel about just this conversation as a whole when it comes to leaders in ministry getting caught up and then trying to come back?
I think if you can't come, if somebody feels that they can't come back, then they don't believe in Jesus. That's just I mean, you got a whole lot of opinions, but that's great. But just the presence of faith in Christ is about resurrection, right? It's about restoration. And that's what Jesus did for us holistically. You know what I mean? And so I think, and then he embodied it himself. So if we go from the Old Testament, from the valley of the dry bones, can they live? Yes, they can live again. You look at Lazarus coming back. You look at Christ coming back. And Jesus restored sight, health, life. And that's what he continues to do for us. So if, in my opinion, if you feel like, no, they can't go back to the pulpit, then my question to you is, what Christ are you believing in? Because evidently it's not the Christ of the Bible. I think just the mere fact to see a major fall, and I keep trying not to preach, but y'all remember the story of Lazarus, right? The story, and we taught this last night. Jesus stayed where he was, right? 2 more days. It would have taken him 4 days to get back, but it took him 6 days to get back. By the time he got back to where Martha and Mary and Lazarus were, Lazarus was already dead. Jesus said it was good that he's dead, because now it helps me to show more of what the power of God can do. Because it's one thing to be able to heal the sick, but it's really miraculous to raise the dead. And sometimes we have to allow that resurrection power of Christ to be active in our lives. A great fall is prime time for Jesus to come in and perform a great resurrection for somebody. And I think that if you believe in Christ, you've got to believe that no matter how hard or how far we fall, that we serve a God that can restore us.
Jermaine, yes, Bowles is a pastor. He's that Black Baptist pastor I was talking about earlier. I told y'all, even when he talks regular, that man sounds like a pastor. He was called to preach since he was 2 years old.
I'm just saying, you don't believe in Jesus if you got an issue with that. That's just my view. And I could be wrong, and that could be an arrogant statement to make. But that's what he is, a resurrector and a restorer. I'm done. The doors of the church are open.
Is there one? Is there one?
Is there one?
One that needs to be restored.
Yeah.
I think real quick, and sorry about that, man. My computer decided they wanted to update right in the middle of this podcast. That's the devil. I think yes, he can come back. Then we have to think about, what does come back mean? Can he come back to the prominence that he once had? That totally is up to God. It has no like reality or that's not up to us. That's not up to him. But as it pertains to going back to do what God has called you to, we kind of talked about this earlier. If this is what God has called you to do, in spite of what you've done, you cannot be less than what God wants you to be and not do what God is asking you to do. So I think if he knows that God is still calling me to go and be a voice for him and a vessel for him, he has to go do it. And again, if you say, well, back to Melissa's point, if you say, like, what is he doing back over here? Then if you're in the church, you have that righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees that Jesus was talking about. In Matthew 5:20, he said, unless your righteousness is greater than the scribes and the Pharisees, you would never enter the kingdom of heaven. The scribes and the Pharisees were very judgmental of people that were walking with Christ, and they couldn't see themselves because of it. So, yes, he can. Does he come back at the prominence? I don't know. But does he come back? If God has called him to do it, he has to. He has to come back.
Real quick, Savannah, before you hop in there, Kyle makes a good point. He says, let's keep it a buck. If he had an affair with your wife or daughter or sister, how would you feel about seeing him back in the pulpit? Because all
It
that
doesn't
sounds good from what we were saying, as far as like, yes, the Bible preaches repentance, all that kind of stuff. But when the rubber hits the road, what we doing here?
It doesn't matter how we feel, though, and I think that's where we go wrong in the church.
Okay,
we talk about how we feel. It don't matter how I feel about it. It's plenty of people that I know that God is opening the pearly gates for. That, in my opinion, that they should be going to hell with gasoline draws on. So how I feel about it doesn't change what the blood of Christ does for us.
Yeah,
right.
Just raise the offering right now, bro. Just raise the offering.
Stop it.
Everybody, just submit your Cash App. You know what I'm saying?
I'm weak. I mean, but there's not much more to be said. When it's all said and done, it's not up to us. And that's the part. That's the part that's entertaining as you watch humans walk through the world, right? We because I think it's innate, and I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say it in this way, but we are made in the image of God. And so a lot of times we like to walk around and act like we are God. We are not the judge, the jury, or the executioner. We don't get to decide how God chooses to use somebody. Just because this person, now admittedly, reading some of this, God bless that man, because between what I'm reading and what I've heard on this podcast, baby fell hard. Like, golly. But, and I also feel for his wife. Like, in reading some of the stuff she said, she really broke when she heard the majority of what had happened in a call with their staff. Like, right. You can't embarrass me like that. Now, God's working on my heart. Apparently he has worked on hers, because they are back together and they kept their family together and they went to counseling, and that's great for you. God, I don't love nobody that much right now in my life. I'm not gonna hold you. If it's not my mama or my grandma, it's a wrap for that man. So God bless her. I'm not married yet. By the grace of God, I'll love somebody that much that one day. But again, it's not up to us. If his wife can forgive him and they can work through regaining their trust, if he can rebuild his relationship with Christ to the point that he's able to forgive himself, and more importantly, understand that though this was a season of my life that I feel like I messed up, God can still use me. That's not on us to decide. We're not God. And humans, again, we like to walk around having this human experience as spiritual beings, as if we are somehow the decision makers. We're not. Again, it's your job as a Christian, if you are a Christian, is to have a relationship with Christ and determine what is the best way and who am I supposed to be under the covering of. It's not your job to decide how that person walks through the world. It's your job to determine what is it that they are saying that is feeding me spiritually, and how am I being convicted by my own actions about what Christ has to say to me, not how that person shows up. Do I think it will be challenging for people to understand that and truly live by it? Sure. But again, if God can use Paul, if God can use David after having Bathsheba's husband killed and then giving that woman a child, if God can use people that are broken every day, who fall every day, to still have their testimony speak to others, it's not up to us. And that's an uncomfortable reality. And yes, there are plenty of people who have been wronged by the church who would be like, oh, it sounds good, but what if it was you? What if it was me? That's God's journey for me. That's God's lesson for me to learn when it's all said and done. So we might not like it, but I'm not God. And so I don't get to decide how that man is or isn't used. I'm going to pray for his family and like Jesus, because again, I won't say again, when you make a decision, it impacts not just you, but everybody around you. And so I hope that as they have taken 3 years to restore themselves and they are now making the decision to come back out into the public, there is grace for them on this big thing in the way that there would be grace for small things.
Does Savannah Michelle McCarthy still go to that church?
Who is that? I want to know who.
I make up middle names. I make up middle names for people all the time.
It's very wrong.
Does Savannah Michelle McCarthy still go to that church if that pastor's coming back?
I like to think so. Right? It's not my reality though. And I'm not in that situation, but I don't know that I'm the person who walks away from a church because somebody falls. that has never been me. I admittedly, I love my pastor back home. I think he's a bit controversial in moments, and I might not agree with you, but that doesn't mean that your word's not preaching to me. That doesn't mean that those who are underneath you, who are picking up the mantle if you do fall, are any less capable of telling me what I need to hear. So I don't know. I can't give an honest answer for that, but I do have grace, and I'm also not somebody who like I quickly correct people when they gossip about things that are frankly just aren't our business. Like I might be frustrated about something, but I'm not one to gossip, mostly because I've seen how gossip hurts people. And as somebody who's been like on the other end of gossip being incorrect, it's not my business, right? But that was my story and my journey. And so I'm quick to snip those things in the bud. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know. But it also begs the question of like, how big does a sin have to be if that person comes back? Like I see somebody in the chat who said, question for the panel: if pedophilia violates a child in children's ministry, should they be restored to the position? Again, like that's a tough question, right? I don't know. That one I think is hard because children, that's a sensitive place.
But if we going by the same thing that you're saying,
know,
we got
right?
to.
Which is why I'm like,
no,
hard.
We don't have to. That's the thing. We don't have to do anything. That's what God does. Because you asked me that question, Maurice says no.
Yeah.
But I also know that the answer to this ain't Maurice's answer. It ain't up to me.
Okay.
So I think we also have, for me, and I'm glad you brought that up, Savannah, because that it triggered a thought. All of us are fighting a spiritual battle. We're not fighting a human battle. We make this thing human, but it's not a human battle. Yeah. So when someone is caught in sin, they're caught in wrestling with these worldly spirits that are just roaming around trying to get inside of us and hurt us anyway, right? So when you find someone that has fallen, as a Christian, it is your duty to empower the godly spirits in that person and not demean the person because of the demonic spirits that have been exposed in this person, right? Now, at the same time, though, I do youth ministry, Maurice do youth ministry. The number one thing that parents need to know when they send their kids to us is that their kids are safe. For sure. That does not mean that I still don't work to restore the human that has fallen because of the spirit, but I can't subject these kids to that spirit that is in you until I know that it has been reconciled. And it's really not for me to wait till it let me ask you, is it right? Are you ready yet? No, God will present you back in a way that will let the people know that you have been reconciled and you have been delivered. But but that's still hard. But because I got to protect you for the kids, still does not mean that I'm looking at you as a horrible person. You're a person that infected with a spirit, which is the whole point. Jesus came. Yeah. Jesus came to save us from the spirits that we're fighting in this world that has disconnected us from God. So
this is a good point. Someone's agreeing with you. Charles in the chat said restoration puts you back into a place of right standing with God and his spirit. You're restored, reconciled, and you can still face the consequences of your action, whether swift or long-standing. And I think that's fair, right? Like, I think it's fair to say you can be restored. No one's taking that right away from you. As children of God, you have the right, and Jesus died on the cross and his blood was shed so that you could have access to that. It doesn't mean that there are not consequences for your actions. Mm-hmm. And to relate it back to your question, Corey, maybe the consequence of Carl Lentz's action is that you don't have access to the pulpit to be the voice in the way that you have been in the past. But maybe this podcast that him and his family is doing is the route that God will use for his testimony to be an example for somebody else so they're not falling in the same way.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think the route that he's chosen, like he's saying, I'm not going back to ministry. Like he's made that decision. He's saying that, there is no, when's the comeback? He's like, no, there is no comeback. Like, this is what I'm doing now. Like, I'm focusing on my family. The comeback is that my family's good now. That is the comeback. Right.
And he did it multiple times. Did he do this multiple times?
Yeah. He didn't just cheat once.
So, but he's coming out saying now that he has cheated, and this is what his self way of dealing with it is. But he's only come out with the entirety of what he's done once. Is that what we're saying?
I think it came out previously, like when he was required to step down from the church. So I think all of it came out then, and then they went into like hiatus. And this is the first time that he's coming back into any kind of light to where people are like seeing him or seeing his life on display.
Right. So I'm asking that because what's the black guy's name? The heavyset dude with the bald head that did this multiple times, came out multiple
John
times.
Gray.
Yeah, John Gray.
John, good old John. I like John. People, good old John. See, and see, maybe
John
that's
was flagrant with it though.
Flagrant. I mean, he was flagrant with it. He's still up there every Sunday, every single Sunday, and his church is still there.
Could we put Jamal Bryant in that same conversation?
We could put Jamal in that same conversation.
That's crazy. That's true.
And Corey, maybe that goes back to how black people look at their pastors. Maybe. Oh, did you just redact my point? I don't know. Because he was flagrant with it, and there may have been, because I followed John Gray pretty heavily for a minute. Like I was excited about him, and then I know he brought Tasha Cobbs in as a worship pastor, but you're not wrong. Oh, I forgot about that one.
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe that does have something to do with like, I don't know, because they also changed the name of their church, John Gray and their church. It was Relentless, and they're now like Love Story Church.
Yeah.
Something like that. But again, I think it had because I had qualms with that. I was like,
the Bose is over it.
Done, finished.
It
I had issue with that, mostly because, sir, as a black woman, can you please respect your black wife more? Like, chill out, my boy. Like, we got enough. Again, that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But like, respect your family and your wife more than to be on the internet involving your kids and your shenanigans. That's number one. But number two, I didn't stop watching John Gray preach because he fell in that regard. And it had so much less to do with him as a person and so much more to do with the words that he was saying. Like his preaching and his convictions, even while he was in his shenanigans, were still speaking to me. And so I was like, I don't agree with you. To be clear, I don't, like, you're bugging right now. You're bugging. And like, you may get up on this stage and cry and apologize, so on and so forth, but God is still using you in that regard. And so, gosh, you all upset me because you're bothering my foundation.
Kurt, hey, look, Kurt too. Kurt, the whole time Kurt was saving my life. And I ain't gonna lie to you, while we sing, all of them CDs that Kurt stomped saved my life. You know, and I'm being funny, but I'm saying I got a lot from the lyrics and the songs of Kurt. Then he comes out and said that whole time I was sold out to porn.
Fooling.
So much so to the point that my wife felt like I was cheating on her with pornography. Almost lost my marriage. But to your point, he was still, you know, ministering to the point where people were being loosed and freed and delivered, you know.
Because that's the anointing that these people have on them in spite of the spirits that they're wrestling with on a daily basis.
It's God.
It doesn't, and for the homie we're talking about now, sometimes, man, when you get knocked down, that is the freedom. Because a lot of pastors are trying to walk this thin line and they are not emotionally, psychologically free. Yeah. They are locked and bonded by the expectation of the people that they're giving this word to. And all of a sudden, when the fall happens, Mike Tyson was in a podcast, the podcast with Ryan Clark and those cats. And they asked him, man, when you got knocked out, they were like, man, I know you felt a certain way. He's like, nah. He said, man, when I got knocked out the next day, it was the freest I'd ever been. Because now I was no longer under the expectation of what people wanted me, needed me to be for them, not for me. So getting knocked down can be a very freeing thing. And when you think about church hurt don't come from the church. It comes from the people in the church. And sometimes you just don't want to deal with them people no more. You're like, you know what? I'm good. I'm going to do my little podcast. I can go and minister out in the world in so many other different ways. I don't have to be in the pulpit to be what God needs me to be. I can be in many different places, and maybe that's the way that he can stay free, be best for his family, as well as be whole within himself. So, live your life, homie.
Yeah.
And last, I'm sorry, and back to Jamal. I know I brought up the homie Jamal Brown. I only brought that up because his fall has been repeatedly in public view.
Yeah.
But the brother is continuing to move forward for what God has called him to do. And people are still going to him, not because they're fools. They're being led there because he's feeding them something, a lot of them, something that they need that God is sending through him. So I don't want to throw that out there like I was throwing shade on him. I was just using that as an example.
Yeah.
And to your point, you made something very clear there that it's not the person that they're getting fed from, right? Mm-hmm. It is the Spirit of God that has intentionally chosen to work through that person, and if that's happening, then to me, that sounds that there's a stamp of God's approval on us in spite of us.
Yeah.
Right. I know it is with me, because if you knew my life before, you would have called me to be on this podcast.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's hilarious. There's this idea in this thought that because he was this celebrity pastor and he lived this very public life and he was wearing the skinny jeans and the deep V-necks and he was friends with Justin Bieber and Kevin Durant and he was doing all these, like, living this celebrity lifestyle, that kind of led to him thinking that he was invincible. And, he wasn't living this necessarily quiet life or this life that wouldn't get you caught up or this life that doesn't put you in the public. And I think people are harder on him more so than they're harder on Tony Evans is because Carl was too cool for church. And some people are just waiting for him to fall. They're like, nah, the fall's coming. He's wearing leather pants on Sunday. Nah, something's happening. You know what I'm saying? So do you think that his persona and his image and this celebrity pastor thing, did that have any part with him in his fall? In your opinion?
I think it can have a part in. First of all, we're in a sick society. The more it looks like you got your stuff together, the people that don't have it together can't wait to see you go down in flames, right? Yeah. And that's just the society we live in. Do I think it adds to that? It adds to people's wishes. Absolutely, it adds to people's wishes. Because, again, going back to what we talked about very early at the very beginning of the podcast, people don't really care about boring people. If we found out a boring person was sleeping through the church, not to say we would overlook it, but it wouldn't be a big deal. You know what I mean? But when somebody that is a big deal does the same thing a boring person does, for some reason it has this level of magnitude. So I do think having that higher, whatever you want to call it, does add to people's wanting to watch you fall. Yeah.
Hmm. But so I guess I'm at yes to that, but also I'm asking, does it contribute to it when you have a different kind of access than a regular pastor because you're the celebrity pastor? So now Kevin Durant's inviting you to the club and he's inviting you to the the after party, and it's till 3 a.m. and there's gonna be models and girls and all kind of stuff. So the access is a little different for Carl than it is for like a Vernon Gordon. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, sure. Yeah, there's access. But again, there's also something to be said for, do you know your boundaries? Like when it's all said and done, your specific boundaries as an individual are going to play into the things that easily tempt you, right? Like and I think, I could be wrong, but I think that when you are new to an environment, like the first time this man went to the club or ended up at an after hour spot, right, from whatever situation he ended up in, there was probably an indicator in that moment where he was like, this might not be the best choice. I have a family and kids at home. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm sitting here wondering what's going to happen next. Or, oh, I'm drinking. He said he was doing drugs. The first time you took Adderall one too many times, you probably knew, oh, this is a problem. But if you don't know your boundaries, or more importantly, don't have people holding you accountable for the decisions that you are making, particularly as someone who is supposed to be a leader of a church, you are going to fall. It's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope. And if you're going to fall down a slippery slope, if you don't have stop gaps there, exactly. See, look, you did that. And I'm thinking about the movie Dope. But like when it's all said and done, if you don't know your boundaries, of course it's going to be easier for you to fall. I don't think leather pants or J's in the pulpit are going to be an indicator of whether or not you're going to fall in there any sooner. But like, if you don't know your boundaries, whether you're in skin tight jeans and a muscle shirt or a full suit because you're trying to be somebody that you're not, if you don't know your boundaries, you're bound to fall because there's nothing there to stop you or put a stopgap in place for you to make a mistake. So I don't think it was access so much as there was nobody around to tell him or just to be a light for him, where it's like, yo, it was, if I'm looking from the outside, this is outside looking in, but if I am giving a perspective of someone who doesn't know the full story, right, it sounds like the only thing you knew how to do was attempt to hold it yourself when you thought you could handle it until you couldn't. And when you couldn't, it was too late.
And you're right with those boundaries. As we talked, I do stand-up comedy. I've been able to hang with some of the most famous people that we all know. And I have been invited. When I lived in LA, I have gone to a lot of parties. And I was proud of myself.
You was in them Diddy parties?
Relax.
Never a Diddy party.
Relax.
Never a Diddy party.
Just asking.
No, never a Diddy party.
I thought they gave him little cross chains out at the door, didn't they? That was one of the gifts. That was one of the Diddy gifts right there.
Got the camera.
The Jake's night.
Not on the Jake's night. Oh my God. Oh my God. Jesus.
Look, we got these shirts. We got
Take that.
Oh,
have you ever been swallowed?
swallowed up. But back to your point. Sorry.
We apologize. Disrespectful.
No, that was good. I was saying, so I've been able to go to a lot of parties where temptation is extremely heavy. I know my struggles, but then I learned, to my sister's point, the things that are totally off, like just off. I'm not even thinking about doing it. And then I learned about the people that were around me. For example, case in point, I'm at a party in LA. Cat Williams brought it up, and it is so true. You go to a major celebrity party, cocaine is on the table, as if just like beer is over in the cooler, just like, you know, the chicken wings are over on the counter. That's how cocaine is sitting on the table.
Crazy.
I go in, I'm having a good time, blah, blah, blah. The guy I go with goes, "Hey, you want a bump?" I don't do cocaine. It's just not what I do. I'm sorry. And it was I was confronted with it, and I'm like, no. He was like, cool. Didn't make me feel bad about it. Didn't pressure me on it. Did not make me feel like I was out of place. And I rocked with him. Same type of story, somebody else at a different party. I then also deny it. Then it was like, well, who you think you is? You might not belong. All that let me know is I'm not hanging with the right person.
Right.
So, you know, when you have access to that level of people and temptation is around you, A, to my sister's point, you got to know what you will and won't do. And B, pray that you're hanging around the right people that will let you be who you really are and not try to influence you to be less than what you let them know that you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. So Carl's on this journey. He's doing the podcast now. He assures us that he's never coming back to ministry the way that we knew him to be in ministry. He seems like very contrite and a broken, an individual that was broken and now is healed. You guys can definitely go check out the rest of the podcast. I highly encourage y'all to go listen to it. He's telling great stories that I think we want to hear as church public. I think that his wife genuinely loves him again. Just hearing their story and hearing their journey. He does admit, and he says every time, because he was an emotional pastor and people were like, yo, why he's always crying? I think he's just faking whatever. He's like, no, every tear that I cried on stage was real. He was a pastor that was one of the first celebrity pastors to endorse Black Lives Matter. He always stood up for Black people. He was that pastor. He was the cool pastor that everybody wanted to have. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of our celebrity pastors now, they learned how to maneuver through situations, positive ones, and how to reach, the lost. because of him. So I definitely wish them the best. I'm rooting for him, and I think that he's giving an example of how you go away after you have a fall. You go away for a long period of time, and then you come back after you've been restored, and then you tell your story. I think we've seen it done sloppy a lot of times, but he's done the process, he's done the work, and now he's back, and it's more power to my man Carl. So shout out to Carl Lentz and his family.
Shout out and prayers.
Yes, for sure, and prayers, 100%. Hi,
Tastemakers. Class. We do more than make a living, we make a life. When everything is dark, we are the light. We are the tastemakers. Aight. Let tomorrow tell the stories that we make tonight. We do more than make a living, we make